A Child's Dream by Frances Cornford. This poem is written by Frances Croft Cornford. She was an English poet and the granddaughter of Charles Darwin. This moving poem is about a small dog and a little child. It would show the beautiful bond. The child has a terrible dream in this poem where the dog, while playing, goes into the woods and gets lost. The dream, however, has a beautiful ending. So let's start the poem. A Child's Dream. I had a little dog, and my dog was very small. He licked me in the face, and he answered to my call. Of all the treasures that were mine, I loved him most of all. So, the poet expresses here poet's liking for the dog. That is why the poet says here that the poet had a little dog, and this dog was very small in size. The dog licked poet's face and he answered to poet's call. Lick means here to touch something with the tongue. So the dog loved the poet so much that it licked poet's face and it answered poet's call. That means whenever the poet called the dog came to the poet and answered all the poet's calls. Of all the treasures that were mine, I loved him most of all. Here the poet says that whatever treasure, whatever valuable things the poet has, this dog was the most valuable for the poet. It is just like a treasure to the poet. His nose was fresh as morning dew and blacker than the night. I thought that it could even snuff the shadows and the light. And his tail he held bravely like a banner in a fight. Further in the stanza, the poet says that the dog's nose, it was as fresh, just like morning dew. Morning dew means the water drops which we could see on the leaves or flowers during the night, and blacker than the night. So the here poet compares dog's nose with morning dew, which is blacker than the night. I thought that it could even snuff the shadows and the light. Further, the poet says that this dog can snuff means smell, can snuff even the shadows, the shade, the shadows, and the light. And his tail he held bravely like a banner in a fight. And the tail of the dog is compared here with a banner, with a flag, which you could see in the picture. The poet says that the tail of the dog is just like a banner which is used in a fight. So it is always held up that way. His body covered thick with hair and was very good to smell. His little stomach underneath was pink as any shell. And as I loved and respected him more than words can tell. Here poet says that the body of the dog is covered with thick hair and the dogs smell very nice. The little stomach underneath here means under or below. So the little stomach, the belly of the dog which could be seen, it was of pink color, just like any shell. And I loved and respected him more than words can tell. here poet once again expresses poet's love for the dog, and poet says here that poet loved the dog and respected the dog more than it could be expressed by telling or using the words. We ran out in the morning, both of us to play, up and down across the fields for all the sunny day. But he ran so swiftly, he ran right away. I looked for him, I called him, time and time again, alas. Here the poet says, we ran out, that the poet ran out with the dog in the morning towards the field, up and down across the field, and then they moved up and down across the field, and it was a sunny day, as it is written here, for all the sunny day. But he ran so swiftly, he ran right away. Swiftly means quickly, but the dog ran so quickly that it just ran right away. At that moment only, the dog ran from there. I looked for him, I called him, time and time again, alas. Because the dog had already run away, the poet called dog's name again and again and looked for means here, and searched for the dog. Alas, but no answer came. The dandelions could not speak, though they had seen him pass, and nowhere was his waving tail among the waving grass. Here dandelion means wild yellow flowers. The dandelions which were around there could not speak, could not tell to the poet, though they had seen the dog running from there. But as we know, dandelions, those are flowers, they cannot speak anything. So the dandelions, those yellow wild flowers, could not tell the poet that where the dog had gone to. And nowhere was his moving tail among the waving grass. Now, because the dog had already ran away, so poet could not find the dog anywhere. So that is why poet writes here that poet could not find the waving here means moving tail among the waving grass. I called him in 1,000 ways, and yet he did not come. The pathways and the hedges were horrible and dumb. I prayed to God who never heard. My grieving soul grew numb. So now here poet says that poet tried to call the dog in 1,000 ways so that the dog could come back to the poet, but it did not come back. The pathways here means walkways, where we walk, the track, the walkways and the hedges. And hedges means here a row of bushes or trees. So the poet walks on the pathways along the hedges, but all those were horrible and dumb. They were all quiet. The poet was now afraid because the poet was not able to find the dog, and the poet calls pathways and hedges dumb. Dumb means one who cannot speak. So because pathways and hedges could not tell the where the dog had gone, so that is why poet says pathways and the hedges were horrible and dumb. I prayed to God who never heard, my grieving soul grew numb. So here, first of all, meaning of grieving soul is a person or somebody who is in deep sorrow or pain. Here numb means when we do not have any sensation. So now when the poet could not find the dog, so then poet prayed to God. And here, because the dog hadn't come back to the poet, so the poet says that the God did not hear, did not respond, did not give any response to poet's deep sorrow, poet's deep pain. So that is why it is written here that the God did not hear to poet's grieving soul and grew numb and didn't show any sensation, didn't give any reaction. The sun sank low, I ran, I prayed. If God has not the power to find him, let me die. I cannot bear another hour. When suddenly I came upon a great yellow flower. Further, because now the poet was looking for the dog and could not find the dog, and the time was passing by, so the sun sank low means here now it was the time of sunset. It was time of sunset. I ran, I prayed. The poet ran and poet prayed to God and says, if God has no power to give the dog back to the poet or to find, then let me die. Means poet wanted to die because poet could not bear. Bear his means tolerate. Poet cannot bear the separation. Another 1 hour separation could not be tolerated by the poet. So that's why poet says that if God doesn't have this much power to give the dog back to the poet, so now the poet wanted to die. Poet didn't wish to wait for another hour. When suddenly I came upon a great yellow flower, and then suddenly means all of a sudden. Then suddenly the poet just saw, just reached at a great yellow flower, and all among its petal, such was heaven's grace. In that golden hour, in that golden place, all among its petals was his hairy face. So now when the poet had reached among the yellow flowers, so poet says here that among all its petals, such was a heaven's grace. Heaven's grace means here God's blessing. Poet says here that among all those petals, part of flower means petals, among all those beautiful flowers, poet finally received God's blessings. Heaven's grace means God's blessing here in that golden hour, and that because it was God's blessing, poet calls it golden hour, special hour, in that golden space, and the place was also special. That is why poet says it was golden hour and the place was also golden. All among its petals was his hairy face. So why this was special time, special place? Because among all those petals, among all those flowers, poet could finally see the hairy face of the dog. That means poet finally found the dog. So this was the poem. I hope you understood the poem. In this poem we have very clear poetic devices also, which are rhyming scheme, imagery, simile, repetition, anaphora, hyperbole, personification and alliteration. So thank you very much.